Oh, hello everyone. Welcome to the Econobox garage. Come on in. Okay, well, now that I have most of the work done on the back of the car, I've got the exhaust in, got all the lights in, the bumpers or overriders, license plate light, fuel tank, license plate mounting. I am going to leave the Sprite emblem till a little bit later, but now that all that's done, I'm going to return to the front of the car. Now I've got the bonnet set in place, and what I'm going to do now is get the front flip hinges installed on the bonnet. So this is the prototype hinge provided by Q1 Classic Engineering out of San Antonio for the left-hand side of the car. And this bolt here goes into the frontmost hole on the chassis leg, and that's the main hinge spot. This bolt here goes into the one just behind it, closer to the radiator, and then these two bolts go through existing holes in the side of the airbox. This one goes in to the hole that would normally be occupied by the hood latch, and there's a second hole just above that where this bolt goes through. One of the design premises for this project was that no new holes would have to be drilled in the side into the car at all. The hole for this one had to be enlarged a little bit, but just a tiny bit, just enough to get the bolt through. Now the kit that was provided came with these stays, and I'll show you how these operate a little bit later. But the one that was provided ended up being too short, and it didn't allow the bonnet to tilt forward enough. So I've made up a longer piece that will be later reproduced in the 1/4 inch aluminum to that. I've got a spacer on here just to keep things lined up. And the other thing I added to the kit was a reinforcing piece that goes inside the airbox to help hold this top bolt in place and to keep the hinge, the whole thing from twisting on the airbox. One of the other modifications I've made on the prototype is to round off the corners on one of the spacers, and I had to do it on two of them on the other side of the car, but that's just to clear the front edge of the chassis leg. And because I've added reinforcing in behind on this one, I've also put a longer bolt in that just to give me a bit more room for nut. So here's the right hand side looking from inside the airbox, and then you can see the reinforcing piece in here, and I made it so it was a tight fit to the angle here and to the angle here, so that helps hold that bolt in place, and that hole is just the right size for the bolt coming through. And the one in the bottom here comes through what would be the hood latch rod that would normally go through that hole, or that's what it looks like from in behind the grill. Here we have the hinge from the opposite side of the airbox, and you can see this is the main hinge pin here, the pivot point. This is the pivot point for the stay, and I can see the longer one that I made to go on. With this length of stay in here, the bonnet is just past the center of gravity, so it will stay up there. And here's the two bolts that go through the side of the airbox. And then the big advantage, of course, with going with front flip is the engine compartment is a lot easier to access from all sides and that. So I'm very happy with how that's turned out. The next thing on the agenda for the bonnet is to figure out how to do the latch to hold it down in place. But that'll be for an upcoming video. So thanks again to Q1 Classic Engineering for providing the prototypes on this. I'll put some of Eric's contact information in the description below. So I'm going to try and wrap up some loose ends here. One of the things is the seal between the bottom of the heater box, which I've pulled out, and the top of the battery tray, and that where the air passes through the heater and into the plenum for the heater inside. There was a factory seal, but it appears to be no longer available. So I just went to Lowe's and picked up some foam window seal. And it fits gaps between 1/4 and 1/2 inch. And then this gap is about 1/4. And it's got one face that is got some adhesive on it, so it'll stick to the bottom of the box here, and then that'll compress and give me a seal all the way around the perimeter of this hole here. Before I try and stick this onto the bottom here, I'm going to get this clean, and just to make sure that surface is as clean as possible to help this stick as well as possible. And now I've installed that seal on the bottom of the box. Still quite a bit left over. It comes in a roll of 10 feet, and it cost me about $10 Canadian. So that is going to do the trick, I'm sure. It's noticeably taller than the gap between here and here, so that'll compress down and give me a good solid seal. The other thing I have to do is make a little seal to go around the inlet and outlet of the heater matrix where it comes through the box. So I found a couple of rubber washers, and I've just made the holes a little bigger, or I'll just make the holes a little bigger to fit over these inlet and outlet pipes. I'll pop the cover off, slide those on, put the cover back on, and then I can reinstall the heater box back in the car. So there you can see I put the little rubber gasket on each of these pipes, and now I can put the cover back on. So if you want to check out how I refurbished the heater box, I'll put a link to that video up in the top corner here. Well, I've got the panels all back together now, and you can just see the rubber gasket poking out of the hole, so that's nice and sealed up. I'm going to reinstall the little plate, identification plate that goes on there. I've cleaned out the threads on the top of the plenum, and then put all this back together. And you can just see, if you look straight down, there's the bottom of the flange, and there's the uncompressed gasket, and that will compress down to that gap, and that should give an adequate seal for that. Well, here I have the heater box all bolted in. Originally these would have been a panhead screw, but I wasn't able to find any in the right thread, so I just went with the correct threaded bolts. So in order to finish off the installation for the heater box, I need to get the screws in for the duct, making sure that this shaft here is vertical. Hose clamps on here. Then I need to hook up a hose from the outlet of the heater matrix to this pipe here, and then that pipe needs to get hooked up into this spot here on the radiator hose. Well, I now have the heater box secured with the bolts into the tray here. The bolts into the tray here. I've got the supply line hooked up and clamped. I've got the screws in here to secure this duct to the heater box, and making sure this shaft here is level or vertical. And on the other side, I have the return line secured, and the hose coming from the heater box with the clamps into the line. Got the 2 P-clamps here and into the return section of the radiator hose. I do have a question though, if you can put an answer down in the comment section. Should there be rubber or some kind of or something on these clamps here? They're snug, but they do vibrate a little bit. I'm just worried about damage to the copper pipe here with all the vibration and that. So if you can leave a comment in the section below, I'd really appreciate that. Although things are looking relatively neat and tidy underneath here, things are looking a little messy over here. And for the next episode, I'll have this all cleaned up, and I'm going to get started on the dashboard, getting it recovered, getting the gauges installed, and getting it wired up before installing it in the car. And there's a few other things that I'll need to do before I can install it, but I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Thanks for joining me. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to share it with your friends. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and don't forget that little bell icon. Click on that, you'll get notified when the next video comes out. My name is Ian. This is the Econobox Garage. We'll see you next time.